Okay. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to one of the last sessions in Tech Ed. So hopefully you're holding up okay and ready for the party tonight. My name's Pat Altamore. I'm a senior consultant at Microsoft. I specialize in working with ISVs on Windows, getting their applications ready. So I specialize in application compatibility as well as some developer topics such as multi-touch. And with me, I have Ben Farmer. And Ben, when he gets to his part, he'll give you an introduction on what he does. So I'm very pleased to have Ben with us, and Ben's going to show you how he develops touch apps. So our goal for this presentation is to talk about the different development platforms for touch and kind of give you an introduction to what Windows 7 Touch is all about and how to make the decisions on what development environment to use and how to design an optimized app. So Windows 7 Touch basically came out when Windows 7 came out. And basically anything that runs Windows 7, if it has a touch digitizer in it, it can support Windows 7 Touch. So there's a lot of buzz about slates and tablets. Those are devices, when we have some up here, that are just coming to market, and there's a lot of cool devices. But there's also other devices that we like to show, in the fact that if you develop a touch-optimized app, it'll run on these devices as well. So we've got the slate, we've got laptops that are generally the swivel type, or just the classic clamshell that you use as a regular laptop, but you can swivel it into a tablet mode. There's the all-in-one PC. These are generally desktop, like put in the family room type environment. And they also support 2 touch points. They're a good solution for a large screen and a low cost. And as well as displays, 3M's got a display that supports 30 touch points. It's capacitive. And you can take a standard desktop and you can put this monitor beside it, plug it in USB, and now you have a multi-touch machine. So there's a wide range of touch systems that you can run these applications on. I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of the new Slate devices. The first one I've actually got here. This is the Asus Slate PC, and it's the first one on the left there on the screen. It's a pretty good laptop, but you'll notice that the Slate devices don't necessarily come with a keyboard. So that's something you should think about when you're designing your application, it's usually a docking solution, or in this case, it comes with a Bluetooth keyboard, which is very nice. So that's a pretty good, powerful PC. In the middle there, I show the Exo PC, which is very similar to this, but a little bit lower performance and a lower cost. And then all the way to the Dell Duo, which is a classic clamshell, but then it's got the flippy screen there that'll flip over and lie flat. And that's kind of a netbook class computer. So you've got all the ranges both on cost and performance there. And when you develop your app, you want to think about the wide range of hardware that's available. So natively in Windows 7, basically any app if it doesn't support multi-touch, what happens is if you don't use the touch APIs, it will convert those touch gestures or touch when you touch the screen. If you don't handle it in your application, it gets converted to a mouse move. Okay, so if you do a tap and release, that's a mouse button down and a mouse button up. And if you move your finger around, that's a mouse move. So a lot of applications already can support touch if they're designed in a way that are basically touch friendly. So there's 3 levels that we like to talk about, and the first one is being just touch friendly. So you don't actually use any of the APIs, but you design your UI in a way that through mouse promotion, it actually performs pretty well as a touch app. Touch enabled is you start thinking about actually providing a good touch experience. Your frequently used controls get a little more prominent. They look like they're designed to be touched. You get some more feedback at the point of contact, and then all the way to touch optimize, where you're trying to enable that touch experience, where you have not only nice controls, a nice UI for touch. You have feedback, where if I do maybe a pan and with a swipe and let go, I get inertia. So it gives this nice experience that people have come to expect with a touch experience. And that's what Ben's going to talk about. He's going to talk about designing for the touch optimized experience. So when you design your app, you should really think about these 3 areas. You want to think about the scenario and functionality that you want to, what your application will need. So you want to think about, what gestures make sense. Do I want to do a pinch zoom? Do I want to do a pan? Does that make sense in my application? Do you have any, are you targeting cross-platform, or do you have any special deployment? That will affect what platform you might choose, because there's limitations on each one. There's pros and cons to each one. You also want to think about your developer skill sets. So if you only know .NET, you're probably going to develop in .NET, right? There's several different environments that you need to choose, but based on what you know, you want to balance that, the requirements and the functionality with your developer skill set. And then finally, whether or not you're going to leverage any existing code. Do you already have a shipping app that you're just trying to make touch friendly or touch optimized, or do you want to create a new application and then leverage some of that code for the phone? So this is the decisions you need to make when you're designing your application. So here are the development platforms that are available for touch. So these basically allow you to get to the touch APIs in some form or fashion. So we've got native. Native, which is basically C++, Win32 application. You have full control over the APIs, so you can access the full environment. This will give you the most control. We've got .NET, so both WPF and Silverlight, and WPF has really good support. Silverlight, because it's cross-platform, there are more limitations on what you can access in Windows. Finally, I'd like to mention the web technologies, IE9. The browser actually has pretty good built-in touch functionality that basically promotes the mouse clicks and mouse moves and pans. So it's actually a pretty good environment, and with HTML5, where it's pretty rich development environment, you can do quite a bit just in the browser. Now Silverlight, you have the option to run Silverlight in the browser, and you can use Silverlight there as well if you're considering cross-platform, really rich animation type solution. This is a graphic of the touch APIs and kind of the different levels that are supported. You've got the raw touch information, which is basically when you touch the screen with one or multiple fingers, you get the touch information and the coordinates and what's happening with all those individual touch points. You can see that basically all the development environments allow that level. Okay, so, and then moving to the right, there's this concept of gestures, which means that the platform or the framework translates multiple touch points into a common gesture. Like if I take my two fingers and I pinch and expand, that translates into a zoom. So it does some calculations for you and some logic that you don't have to do. And we get that in native, and we also get that in .NET, basically WPF. And then finally, the richest experience, which is the gesture combinations, you get that in native and WPF, and that means if I have multiple touch points and I'm doing multiple things, not only scaling, zooming and scaling, but rotation, the very complex scenarios like that, you can do that in native and .NET. And then I just want to make a mention about DirectX and XNA. Those, because you have a lot of control over the platform in both those environments. You can do everything. Basically, you're leveraging the Windows APIs at that point, and those are very rich as well. There is a document out on MSDN that I highly recommend. It's called the Windows Touch Application Development Guidance Document. You can just search on MSDN. I've got a link here as well. It walks through all the different development environments, points you to the best information on MSDN. And so a lot of the concepts that I covered in these first few slides, it walks through there and talks about where to get more information on each one of the development environments. With that, I'm going to jump into a demo and then turn it over to Ben. What I want to show in this demo is some shipping applications. Before I switch it, let me make sure it's on. Okay. Some shipping applications that use the different development environments. So the first one I want to start with is OneNote. So you might be familiar with OneNote. Actually, OneNote doesn't actually have any touch enabled. They're not using the touch APIs in here, but it's because it's designed to work with a tablet and the stylus. It actually provides a pretty good touch experience. So like they have some fairly big targets. So if I just click with my finger or touch with my finger on this tab, I can hit it easily with the size of my finger. I can do panning. I can zoom, right? So what's happening in OneNote is it's translating these gestures into mouse moves. So like a zoom, that's actually a control mouse wheel. So you can see, well, my control, there's my control. So I'm holding down control on the keyboard and rolling the mouse wheel. That's what's actually happening when I'm clicking the screen. So even if you don't implement the APIs, you can still have a pretty rich experience if your application UI is designed in a way to enable touch. So that's a native application that's kind of legacy but still works in touch very well. Next thing I want to show you is a WPF application. This is called PressReader. You can download this today from Windows Product Scout or from their website. It's a newspaper reader. So I'm going to click here at some newspapers that I've already downloaded. You can see that they made the controls pretty big touch targets. You can see the close button, my minimize button, all nice and big. I can do swipe gestures to flip through the paper. They handle, I'm not going to rotate, I've got a bunch of cables hooked into this, so I'm not going to actually rotate it, but if I did, they give a good experience on the rotation as well. I can reformat the layout. Their performance is pretty good. This is a fairly high-end machine, but I get a really good feedback in their application. So this is a good example of what you can do with WPF. Now I want to show a Silverlight app. So I've got Flickr here. Flickr has an application that's designed for Windows Touch. And the way they decided to implement, which I like this UI, they show you pictures here, but then they have these blades that I can flip through. So I'm just doing a swipe from left to right, or right to left. And then I can also scroll inside here and then click on the image to bring it up. And I get a really good experience inside the environment. They have nice big buttons. One thing that I'll show you here, notice that their search, this is a Silverlight app. One disadvantage to Silverlight is you don't get the touch input panel by default because it's designed for cross-platform. Touch input panel looks like, I have it turned off right now. Let me bring it up real quick. It looks like that. So most applications like WPF applications or native applications, as soon as they show the caret in a text box, it'll show you the tip icon, which looks like a little keyboard, and then I can bring it up. So so this is again a Silverlight app. All right, let's take a look at. So I did WPF, I did Silverlight, I did native. So I ran through all the things. Let me show you IE real quick. And just the experience inside IE. So IE is pretty rich. I can do panning. I can click on things. It handles this pretty well. I'm just going to bring up a good HTML5 example. Here's a Texas Hold'em. This is from the test drive site. You can see that I can zoom and get a pretty good experience. I can start it. I can click on these nice big buttons. And this is a pretty good touch experience inside the browser. Again, I won't rotate, but on a rotate, they do a nice job of resizing this app. So you can get a good experience inside the browser as well. Any questions before I turn it over to Ben? Oh, yeah.
Are there any alternate keyboards, like, or do you guys try to get a number pad?
There are a lot of good like Bluetooth devices.
No, I mean like the on-screen.
Oh, on-screen keyboard. So the question is there any more keyboards, virtual keyboards that are built in? The tip keyboard is basically what's built into Windows. And if you can use it, if you have the ability, like use something like WPF or native, what's nice about that is it's already localized and whatnot. I don't think there's a...
Well, there isn't any option on that particular one.
I've
searched through the settings.
Yeah, as far as I know, it's the standard. What you get is what you see there. The advantage is it's built in, and you get some localization as well as far as the operating system goes. But yeah, I don't think there's a numeric keypad. So if you're in that situation, you need to think about possibly implementing your own virtual keypad or keyboard.
Are there links out there how to do
I've seen some samples, like especially around Silverlight, because Silverlight doesn't enable that. I've seen some pretty good samples on virtual keyboards that people have implemented, like on CodePlex that are available for download. So that's what I would suggest. Yeah, another question. So the question is, if you download one of these virtual keyboards, does it integrate into the operating system? Is that your question?
Like the Windows mobile device replaces the keyboard, and you can then select which one you want.
Yeah, no.
You effectively do that.
No, the tip keyboard is what you can have. You can't replace it that I know of, unless a very low level. Generally what I see people do is they just implement their own. The disadvantage to implementing your own is possibly localization, right? So if you have to localize your application, you may have to localize the keyboard as well. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
You guys hear me? No.
Yeah.
How about now? Okay. Great. Okay. So thank you, Pat. My name is Ben Farmer. I am a developer at Clarity Consulting in Chicago, and we generally write any application on the .NET stack, ASP.NET, Silverlight, WPF, that kind of thing, primarily for businesses, but we do some consumer-focused applications for our partners. And lately, I've been working on a fair number of applications that utilize touch on Windows 7, and I worked with Pat on one of these projects. We've really have worked across the board as far as hardware goes. We've done some projects that utilize kind of large format displays, high definition plasma TVs that are bolted to the wall that have kind of an enclosure that lets you walk up and touch it. So these are kiosks that are put in malls or airports or that kind of thing. I've done some work on Surface. I've done some applications that target these tablets that run Windows 7. And I've also done a little bit of Windows Phone 7 as well. And so what I want to kind of do today is give a very practical point of view of what it's like to develop these applications, kind of the ups and downs of writing apps on this platform. I really believe you can do some great stuff on this, and I think that a lot of the stuff that's been baked into, especially WPF and Silverlight from day one, really shines through on a touch environment. So I want to kind of go through my piece in three separate parts. I want to talk generally about just the things that you ought to consider when you're starting out writing these applications. Is everybody in here a developer? Can you raise your hand if you are? Anybody not a developer? Okay, welcome. Thanks for coming. So how about WPF or native? How many people in here WPF developers? Okay, Silverlight? No, native? Okay. Unfortunately, my demo is going to be in WPF, so you'll have to bear with me. But I've done this in Silverlight as well. So what I'm going to talk about, the things you ought to consider will be broadly applicable to any application, I think. And then I want to go into a demo that'll get you started in writing these applications. And then finally, at the end, I want to show you some of the applications that I've written recently to kind of give you an idea of where you can take the platform and turn it into something that doesn't look like a traditional Windows application. So when you're starting out writing these applications, you generally want to think about three big things. You want to think about the platform and some of the expectations a lot of people I've talked to have about what a touch platform is, especially when you think about tablets. A lot of people have expectations what a tablet platform ought to be. And I want to kind of dive into what you as a developer should expect. And then finally, I want to go over some kind of good design practices that you should utilize when you're going to write these applications. So touch on Windows 7 is a little bit of a different platform than something, say, like iOS or Android. And like I said before, you can still write some really great applications on here. But the biggest difference, I think, that is immediately apparent when you use one of these devices is that Windows has a very long history of being an operating system that's designed to be used by a keyboard and mouse. And for better or for worse, a lot of the things in Windows are just kind of really hard to do with your finger. That being said, I think that there are some situations and scenarios you might want to write applications for that the platform really shines. And the three biggest ones that I think are relevant are what I call highly focused business scenarios, hybrid applications, and adding incremental touch support to your app. A highly focused business scenario, I just made that up. But what I mean by that is if you have something that's very specific to your business, or an application that it's really the only thing that the user is going to be doing with this device, then I think it's kind of irrelevant what the underlying operating system is. And the fact that on Windows, you as developers and folks that are IT pros and administrators really know how to lock machines down to just that, to fit that scenario. So you probably, if you have, say, a shop floor with a specific application that your workers on the line are using to do their job, you probably don't want them going out to a general public marketplace and downloading Twitter and running that on the app. You want to be able to make sure that that machine is locked down, secure, and highly available, and does what it needs to do. And I think you can do that very easily on Windows, and it provide a great experience for your users as well. Another scenario that I think Windows really shines is kind of the hybrid application. So Pat showed you some of the devices and kind of the spectrum of devices that are coming out. I really think that there are, in the future, going to be a lot more types of devices, not just a tablet form factor or kind of a laptop that is also a touch, but we're seeing some interesting stuff now, and I'm sure it's only going to get better as we go forward. And as people in your companies start to use these kind of hybrid devices, they're going to want applications that really do the things that they're already doing with a keyboard and mouse, but they're also maybe 10 or 20% of the time going to want to go to a meeting or go to a customer site, flip that machine around into tablet mode, and have their core functions available to them through a touch interface. And because you're still using the same platform to write these applications, whether it's a keyboard and mouse scenario or a touch scenario, it's pretty easy to kind of make the buttons that are important for a touch scenario bigger and easier to use, while still making things like data entry nice to use on a keyboard and mouse. And then finally, the last thing I think is interesting is adding incremental touch support for your applications. So if you have applications that you are currently supporting, currently writing, you probably don't want to just scrap everything you've done and roll out a whole new application for your enterprise users or for your customers. That may make sense in some situations, but I'm guessing a lot of people will want to kind of gradually over time add features that are enabled with touch. And because if you're writing your applications on one of the platforms for Windows today, you already have that capability. And you can, like Pat showed with OneNote, make it work pretty well maybe this year and maybe next year as you get more users with touch devices, you can start adding those features where they make sense. The next thing about the platform that's a little bit different than other touch platforms, especially on a tablet environment, is the deployment story. So on Windows 7, unlike Windows Phone 7, there is no marketplace where you can put your applications out there for consumers to find and purchase. I think that's actually an advantage for a lot of situations because you still have all of the really rich deployment options that you have with your Windows applications today. If you're using things like Active Directory or some of the other tools that are out there for getting your applications out to your users, you can still use those tools today with touch applications. None of it's different. Your admins already know how to do it, and they've already got a lot of experience doing that. If you want to target something towards consumers, you can use something like Click Once or Silverlight as a way to get your apps out there that's kind of low impact for your users to install. And then if you're doing kind of fancier things with MSIs or setup.exe scenarios, you can still do all that. And that whole thing is still available to you. And so the last thing that's a little bit different about the platform, and I think this is a great feature, is that you have a lot to build on. You've got a lot of experience, you've got a lot of tooling, you've got a lot of libraries that either you've built internally or that you've purchased or gotten from a third party. If those work on, if you're using WPF, if they work on WPF now, they're going to work on WPF Touch. There's nothing different. You don't have to learn a whole new stack of APIs. You just kind of have to learn a little bit at the top level. There's also a ton of great peripherals out there. So I've talked to some customers that have interesting ideas about what they want to do with touch in their environments, but they really need a specific barcode scanner, or they really need some other kind of less broadly distributed peripheral. If it works with Windows today, it's going to work with Windows and Touch. And finally, like I said, the devices, there's a lot of different form factors coming online, a lot of different price points and processing power capabilities. I think it's always good to have more flexibility and to have more options when you're talking about procuring hardware. So that's kind of the difference in the platform as I see it. Like I said, I still think it's a really great platform to develop applications that use touch on. It's just a little bit different mindset maybe than you're coming at, especially if you're looking at comparing tablets across the board. So the next thing I want to kind of talk about is what you as a developer should expect when you start to write these applications. And the first thing you should expect is there's no reason to freak out. You already know how to do these kinds of apps. You're really just doing a little bit extra that maybe you weren't doing before. You're using one more API that you weren't. But it's still the same platform that you know and love and have been working with. You still have all the really great tooling support. IntelliSense is still there. You're still going to use Visual Studio. Whatever other tools you're using today are still going to be applicable. You don't have to go out and start from scratch on a whole new platform. And then finally, all you're really changing is the UI level. So all your data access story is going to be the same if you're writing applications on Windows. All of your business logic is going to be transferable. And all that work you did to separate out concerns and get your UI separated out from your business logic, like we all do 100% all the time, is totally going to pay off because now you can just change the UI a little bit. So all you really need to do is just think about some of the some fundamental design differences when you write these applications. Now, I'm not a graphic designer, and that's not what I'm talking about with design here. I'm talking just kind of about basic things that you should think about as you're laying out your forms or as you're building your UI and as you're talking to people within your company about what the requirements of the application are. The first thing that I think is a little different from a design point of view with touch is that I feel like users have a lot higher expectations for touch than they do with kind of traditional desktop and keyboard and mouse applications. And I think, in my mind, there are kind of two reasons for this. One is that when you're actually touching the machine, I think there's more expectation of a physical reaction. We're all used to holding things in our hand and pushing things and friction and gravity and tactile feedback. And I think that sets the bar a little higher when you're talking about actually touching the UI instead of just looking at it and going through the mouse. And the other thing that I think gives users higher expectations is the bar has just been set really, really high by consumer smartphones. So devices like the iPhone and iPad, Windows Phone 7, Android, they just have really good applications, really good UIs. And I think a lot of the people that I've talked to associate touch with that really high degree of polish and design. So, that's just been my experience working with my clients, that as soon as we start talking about touch, they get really excited. I'm like, oh, great, I'm going to get Android applications on my desktop now. So just something to watch out for. I would highly recommend that when you start out writing applications, that you challenge all of the assumptions that you have about what a UI is and what each element is. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go through and redesign or relearn how to do an application or throw everything you know out the window. But to me, it seems like there are a million little things that have just melted into the background with the user interface that I've completely not even thought about, that really just don't work in a touch situation. The best example I can think of for that is the buttons are in the upper right-hand corner of every application, minimize, maximize, close. Those are actually pretty small for a touch target, and it's really frustrating to use those in a touch environment because they're so close together. If you mean to maximize and you inadvertently hit that close button, that's a really jarring experience. You're probably going to close your app and hopefully not lose your data, but you might. So think hard about things like the target size of the thing that you're asking the user to touch. I typically, as a guideline, don't want to show anything to the user that I expect them to touch that's smaller than 50 by 50 pixels. That's just, in my own observation, that's about how big the tip of my finger is, and I can usually, people usually are able to hit that target. I don't know what the official guidance is. The document that Pat referenced has tips like that about how to, kind of minimum sizes and best practice sizes for that. The one thing that always gets me, and that I always have to remind other developers and designers, is that there is no hover state in a touch application, because especially on a capacitive touch screen, it doesn't detect a touch until your finger is actually down, and that gets translated more or less into a mouse click or a touch down event. And so, a lot of people have encoded extra information on like tooltips or kind of the state of an icon or a control when you hover over it. And that, that'll get you. You need to think about things like how your navigation is set up. Is it set up using really tiny pull-down menus that have multiple layers and not much spacing apart? That's really tricky to do. If your user interface requires a lot of text entry, it may not be a great fit for a touch application, or you may want to kind of rethink things. If you had really heavily leveraged search in your UI, I think that's a great way to do a UI, but it's hard to do that in a touch environment because you have to use the virtual keyboard, and it can get pretty frustrating. So maybe you want to have like a hierarchy or a drill down or something like that. And the last thing I'll say about this is device ergonomics, or kind of how you hold the device or what it's physically like to use the device, plays a pretty big role in this. When we do things with a large wall-mounted display, you always want to have somebody try it, and if you can, have somebody try it in a chair as if they're in a wheelchair or something, because physically holding your arms and touching things can get pretty awkward to do, especially if, stand next to Pat, if it's in a mall and there's someone this close to you and I have to reach across to touch a control, that can be awkward. So I would always say, as early and as often as you can, use your application on the device that it's actually going to be used on, and in a situation that's as close as possible to the actual use. I think it's absolutely critical that the development team from day one on a project have access to the real touch hardware. And the same goes for design and test too. You're just not going to get it right without actually doing it on the device. And you've got 10, 20, 30 years of experience of how to design applications, and you don't even think about these things anymore. But touch is kind of a whole new ballgame. So, if your managers don't want to get you the hardware, tell them that I think it's absolutely critical, and you're going to make a big mistake if you don't get the hardware from day one. So that's that's kind of what I wanted to talk about at a high level. You know, the platform is a little bit different than other touch platforms that are out there, but I think it's still a really great one to write applications, especially in some key scenarios. I think that it's really not that much different than what you're doing now as far as development. It's still all the same platforms you know and love. You're really just adding a little bit on top of your existing applications. And then there are some things that you want to think about when you start to build these applications and do your projects. So I want to switch now and jump into Visual Studio and show you guys some code. Like I said, it's going to be in WPF just because that was, I think, the easiest demo in the time we have, which we're actually doing pretty good, to show you what it's like. A lot of this is applicable to Silverlight. I'm not sure about the native stuff, but it's probably similar. But the easiest way to get started with doing touch development is kind of in three pieces. You can take the standard controls that ship in the system libraries or in the libraries that are built into the platform. A lot of those, especially on WPF4 and Silverlight 4, are already going to work pretty well with touch. Windows does a pretty good job promoting touch events to mouse events and kind of handling a lot of the touch events for you. So we'll see that you may not even have to do anything to write a touch app. You may already have written a touch app, and you just don't even know it. And then I want to cover what I call the touch star events. So these are very analogous to mouse events: mouse down, mouse move, mouse up, etc. And they work more or less the same way. And then finally, I'll show you some of the fancier manipulation star events. And that's how you start to do complex, kind of multifaceted interactions with it. So my machine hasn't gone to sleep. Okay. So like I said, this is WPF. This is a pretty generic vanilla master details kind of an application. I got the data out of the AdventureWorks sample database, and it's just a list on the left and details on the right. And if you go back into Visual Studio, I haven't done anything special for this application. It's just a normal standard list box, binding to a view model that I have set up. And I'm not doing anything magical in the code behind. And what I want to show you is this laptop that I'm using is a Lenovo ThinkPad that happens to have a 4-point capacitive touchscreen on it. And so without me doing anything as a developer, I can kind of drag this here, and I get pretty good support. It kind of does inertia for me. I can select different items. And it works about like you would kind of expect a touch application to work without having to do anything. So, it's a little awkward to kind of, if I wanted to drag the scroll bar there, it's a little awkward to kind of pick out individual items in the list box, but it works pretty well. So that's good news, right? You don't have to really do anything to be a touch developer. You already are. But I think we can do a little bit better with still not doing anything special here. And I have a predefined style that I call Simple Touch List Box, I think. Nope. Oh, I need to bind it. Okay, let's try it again. So all I've done is apply a style to this list box here. I've put a little bit of spacing between the elements. I made sure that they had a background so that you could touch all the way over here. Can you guys see the little dot? Okay. You can touch all the way over near the edge, and you'll still get the selection that you wanted. But otherwise, I didn't really have to change anything. I changed the background color. But this is now a lot more touch-friendly. And this would probably be good in a lot of situations where I had a user that occasionally uses an application on a touch device, or maybe I only have one user in the department that's piloting it or something like that. You can make a lot of these small changes in your application and really have a big impact on users that are using your app through a touch device. So the next level that I want to do is I want to wire up what I refer to as the touch star event. Try not to talk into the mic. I'm going to wire up a handler for the touch down and the touch up events. And this looks a lot like what you're used to seeing with a mouse. You know, it's not all that different. Touch down is when I touch the device. Touch up is when I stop touching the device or when I leave the control. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the background color. When your finger's down on it, it'll be one color. And when you lift it up, it'll go back to being transparent. And since this is tech ed and I didn't want the non-developers in the room to feel left out, I'm going to use Azure as my background color. Put it back to transparent. So I've wired up a handler to the touchdown event on the big control that's on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can see when I don't know if you can really see it, but when I'm touching, it turns blue, and then when I let go, it turns up, just like you'd expect with a mouse event. You know, there's nothing fundamentally different really about what you're doing. But you don't get any support. Yeah. Now, a lot of situations, I've written applications where the touch support is just mouse down, and I'll let it go ahead and let the operating system bubble it through to that. And that works very well in a lot of situations. Sometimes you may, I can't think of a scenario off the top of my head, but you may want to have a slightly different behavior when you're touching versus when you're mousing. You know, people tend to make kind of small, fast movements with the mouse, so you may want to kind of go a further distance on a scroll or something like that versus when you're touching. But you can use them interchangeably. And they work very similarly. Any other questions before I move on? Yep. True. Yeah, this laptop, I think, does 4 points. And in the event args, you can actually, there's some extra properties here. Original source and touch device and get touch point method give you access to more of those things. And you can get an array of what the touch devices are. I'm sorry, the touch points that are coming from your device. But frankly, I don't usually write those kinds of interactions too often. What I usually do instead is use the other set of events. Oops. I'm just going to switch my window that opens up here. There's another set of events that are available in WPF called the manipulation events. And I'm going to quickly show how you can use that. I think it kind of rolls up a lot of the complexities of tracking multiple touch points into the numbers that you're really after, which is how much has the kind of constellation of touch points moved in the X or Y direction? Have I expanded or contracted my pinch points? Have I done any kind of rotation? That math can get kind of tricky to do if you're iterating through the array and trying to figure it out yourself. So I have this application that has this just one big rectangle in the middle. And what I would like to do is to be able to touch it and kind of drag it around and have it follow my finger. And the manipulation events make that pretty easy to do, I think. So like I said, just one big grid and a rectangle. The first property you need to set is this is manipulation enabled property. And in WPF, the manipulation events aren't going to fire. There is some expense to wiring up the manipulation handlers, and they're not on by default. So this is manipulation enabled property turns those on and makes your touch events start, or your manipulation events start firing. And then I'm going to, wire up a handler in the manipulation starting event. And this is something that wasn't intuitive to me when I first started. But when you're talking about, let's bring this back up, talking about moving this rectangle around, when you start to move it, that movement of the control is going to actually move the coordinates of where your finger is relative to that control, right? Because the control itself has moved a little bit, and now when you get that point back, it's going to be a little bit different. So the manipulation handlers in WPF have this idea of a manipulation container, and I'm going to set that to the outermost grid in the window. And then what this is going to do is say, I'm still tracking manipulation events on my red rectangle, but what I really want to do is get things back relative to that outer grid so that I can move it around the grid and kind of think of my world in those terms. Does that make sense? Anybody have questions? Okay. And then finally, I'm going to wire up a handler to the manipulation delta event. Manipulation delta fires any time that there is a change, whether it be kind of a lateral movement of your touch points or a scale operation or a rotate operation. It also fires when you flick, so when you are moving a device and you are moving a control across and you lift up your finger, this is going to continue to fire if you set some properties, and that's how you'll kind of handle movement even after the finger is gone. So I have this translate transform, and all this is going to do is affect an offset of where that red rectangle gets rendered in relationship to its layout, for those of you that aren't WPF developers. And I'm going to set its X property. I'm actually going to increment it the difference that we've moved across the screen. So the event args in manipulation delta has two concepts. It has cumulative manipulation, which is how much have I moved since I started this gesture, this manipulation. That's useful in some scenarios, like if you want to see if someone has moved far enough to trigger kind of a flick, or have they gone past a certain threshold that maybe you want to scroll or do something. But it also provides this delta manipulation, which is what I'm interested in, which this is just the change that we've made since the last time this event is fired. And since I just want to increment the offset for my rectangle a little bit, I'm going to use that. Both the cumulative and delta manipulation objects have four important properties: rotation, scale, translation, and expansion. Rotation is just kind of how much did we twist the whole constellation of touch points. Expansion is how much pinching or zooming did we do. Translation is how much side to side or up and down did we do. And expansion is very similar to scale, except that it's in pixel units and not in kind of factor of multiplication units. Conceptually, it's the same thing, but depending on the math you want to do, it may be useful to have one and not the other. But I'm concerned about translation, so I'm just going to add the X component of the translation to my transform there, and I'm going to do the same thing for Y. And hopefully if I didn't make any mistakes, I'm just going to touch the red rectangle and then drag it around, and it's going to follow my finger, incrementing the translate transform as I go. I don't think I have time for it today, but if we wanted to, you could very easily do the same thing and do rotation or scale and that kind of thing. And you can build up some pretty complex interactions, pretty complex gestures by using these events. And they've done a lot of the hard math for you. So, and this works, you can't really see it, but I've got 2 fingers down here, and it works perfectly well. It's still giving you that aggregated translation and not just a single point. So if you want to implement something like 2-finger panning or something like that, this would be a good way to do it. Any questions or comments before I move on to the demos? I think we're a little bit ahead of time, so that's good. Okay? Yep. So you want to make a kiosk application where what? That is probably the best segue I could have asked for. So thank you very much. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. Yeah, we do it all the time at my company. And so what I want to do now is show some of the examples of applications that we've used. These are tablet applications, but I think a lot of the things that we do in these apps would be very applicable to a kiosk situation. And there are some other tips and tricks you can do for kiosks, a lot of which are just configuring Windows correctly. So things like, obviously, you want to turn off the screensaver, you want to auto-hide the taskbar, you want to get rid of any desktop icons or anything like that. The first example that I want to show is a Silverlight 4 application that I worked with the Tribune Company on. And so what Tribune Company wants to do is create, for those of you that don't know, Tribune Company is a media company. They own 8 flagship newspaper properties in the U.S., kind of in major metro areas, including LA Times and Chicago Tribune. And they also own a bunch of TV and radio stations as well. And so they've got all this really great content. They've got reporters and photographers out, doing the hard work of journalism. And they wanted to kind of reach out to people that were using these tablet devices, as well as a way for people to get exposure to content that maybe wasn't in their metro area. So I live in Chicago, but there might be things happening in LA that I'm interested in. And this application was designed to expose that content a little more. So like I said, this is Silverlight 4. This is pulling down data from, they have an Azure backend that goes out, gets all the news. You just saw a refresh of the data come in. And this doesn't look like a traditional Silverlight application. We wanted it to be as close to full screen as possible. We wanted it to be very easy to interact with from a touch laptop or touch tablet. So we've used great big buttons here. You can kind of click on the image and see the first part of the headline as much as it'll fit. But this is indeed running Silverlight 4 in the background. This would be very applicable to a kiosk if you wanted to use Silverlight to deploy out to kiosks or some other kind of environment. This is what we call a dashboard. It allows you to see what's happening in the news right now, kind of the breaking news, and then news that's relevant to your location and your preferences. You can also, over on this side, subscribe to your favorite publications. I've got LA Times, Chicago Tribune, and Baltimore Sun here. You can add RSS feeds if you want to. A lot of this content moves on its own, but is also interactive. Does panning and is manipulatable by the finger. You can touch on it and go directly to the story, and then read the story, scroll through different stories that are trending right now. This design was pretty heavily influenced by Windows Phone 7. So we wanted to kind of minimize the chrome that you're seeing on the screen, let the content shine through, which Tribune is very interested in. The other thing this application does, which was kind of interesting, is it lets you set the location. If the device has a GPS in it, it'll just automatically pick that up. If it doesn't, it lets you enter the zip code that you want. So right now it's set for Atlanta, but I'm going to be heading home tomorrow, so I want to put it back to a Chicago zip code. And it picked up that change, and now it'll go out and kind of reformat the news based on the location I put in and kind of give me stuff that's more relevant to Chicago and me as a Chicago person. Any questions about this? We're doing good on time. I can talk technical about it, or anyway. Right. So your question is, what was the target device, and then would this run on Android or like an iPhone type environment? Right. So yeah. So it is targeting a consumer tablet. So a person that went to Best Buy or whatever and purchased their own tablet device. Tribune is very interested in what Microsoft calls the in-screen plus cloud scenario. So they want to reach out definitely to Android users and to users on other platforms and give them the same experience, and not just the same experience, but their own personalized experience in the various states of the computing that they're doing throughout the day. And this is a fairly new project, but they've already launched on Android, and they're very soon going to launch on Windows Phone 7 as well. And the idea was that maybe if I'm a commuter in the morning and I take the bus, when I'm standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus to arrive, I may want to flick through and see what the top news is for the day on my phone. But then when I get on that bus and I start the longer journey into work, I may be more comfortable putting my phone away, pulling out my tablet, and getting those same stories that I'm interested in, the same things I started reading on my phone, but now transition over to a tablet and continue that experience. And then maybe in the future have a really great desktop application that I could continue reading when I get to the office or get home or something like that. We're seeing a lot of companies do that. Like Netflix is a really great example. They're on just about every platform you can think of. And they also use Silverlight for a lot of things, which is kind of interesting.
One thing I'd like to say, too, is this will run on any Windows desktop as well. So even though this is targeted for touch, when you think about designing, you could think about not only working with touch, but also working with the mouse in case somebody, so you have a broader audience. You've got all the desktops and optimized for touch. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. We did make sure to wire up everything. In a lot of cases, we're just letting the platform permeate the touch events down to a mouse click. When we're not doing that, we made sure there was a mouse equivalent, and then we did things like add hover support that a touch user probably won't see, but a mouse user will. And everything else kind of works the way you'd expect. And that's great because it gets into your Mac users and to some degree your Linux users as well. So it just keeps broadening that audience. Yeah, the comment was it would look good on a TV. I totally agree. I really wanted to get this on a wall-mounted thing. I couldn't find the hardware, anybody at Tribune that had it to demo it. But yeah, I definitely thought about that. So the next application I want to show is a little bit, actually I have a slide. Oh, one last comment about the Mosaic by Tribune application is that this is publicly available now. You can just go to mosaicbytribune.com, download it. Like Pat said, you don't need a touch device to run it. It'll run perfectly fine on your Windows PC. It'll probably run on your Mac too. I don't have a Mac, but I know it was tested on there. And then they also have an Android and coming soon a Windows Phone version of it. The next application I want to show you is targeted more at enterprise. And this is a group I worked with called, the company's called Chicago Mercantile Exchange Group, and they're a big trading house. They trade, they have a trading floor. They swap futures and commodities and things. They've been operating in Chicago for a very long time. And I was able to work with the group within Mercantile Exchange that does auditing. So if any company wants to trade on their trading floor, they have to meet certain requirements of capital. And I'm not a financials guy, but they do an awful lot of checking on all these companies. And these auditors are a good example of the kind of person who spends 70 to 80% of their time at their desk working, but then that other 20 to 30% of the time they go out, they meet with their clients, or they have a meeting with somebody else within their own organization, and they want to quickly be able to pull up information and kind of consume that data in a way that is more comfortable than dragging their laptop along with them and trying to click through their application. They've had a version of this application that was built on VB Forms, I think probably starting in VB3 or VB4, for over 10 years. They've moved it forward, and as their business has changed, they brought it along. And they wanted to, in this case, give out these devices to a handful of their users that they know are early adopters, just to kind of to see where this would go in the company. Is there an interest in people having a tablet device or a hybrid device? And this was very much kind of a trial, and let's try it and learn. So what we decided to do was port over the two core pieces of functionality that these auditors would do into a touch environment and kind of see how it sticks. People are still using the old application at their desktop with a keyboard and mouse, the way they've done for years, but this was kind of an augment to that experience. So the two major pieces of functionality are just kind of contact lookup. So they have a whole bunch of firms that trade with them. These names are obfuscated. I think they came out of AdventureWorks or something. But these aren't the real names of people and places. But in meetings a lot, they want to quickly be able to look up somebody's contact info, find out who is the person I need to talk about this situation with, what's their email address or phone number, can I quickly get that information? And so this screen is just a fairly simple master details lookup. We've got some support for search. And so you can use the on-screen keyboard or you can use the physical keyboard. I'll use the on-screen here. See if there are any Johns. Yeah, so there's a few Johns. I'm filtering that as I type it in. And then you can sort by firm as well. So if there's anybody in this one, no Johns in Good Day, Mate. But that's an example of the glyph that Pat was talking about. WPF, you don't have to do anything to make that little keyboard icon appear. Just put it in a text box and it'll automatically come back up. So the other thing that their auditors do pretty frequently is look at the data that they've actually collected from these firms and kind of see how their customers are doing in relationship to what their requirements are. And what I want to show you now is the piece that we built for bringing up that data and making it kind of more friendly to consume on a tablet. I'm just going to type this in manually, but the idea here is that these auditors go out and they have these very long forms that they ask their customers to fill out, and they collect all that data, throw it into a database, and do analytics on it. And here we're pulling that same information and graphing it in a way that's easy to look at, easy to do comparisons, and kind of fun to watch do that little fly in. You can switch back and forth between what's highlighted and see, the trend here is what's important. You want to kind of see as one of these numbers goes up, does the other one also go up? But if you want to, you can also flip over and look at the raw data, which is something that they do pretty frequently as well. But this application, I think, is also another great example of something that you could easily translate into a kiosk, right? We're running in full screen. It's a Chromeless window, so we've taken away the the border and the ability for the user to resize. If we didn't have this close button over here, kind of right there, you wouldn't be able to do anything, and especially if a kiosk didn't have a keyboard and mouse hooked up to it. You could lock down the application that way, and then of course in Windows you could set group policy to make sure that only this particular application can run, and monitor to make sure that it's running all the time. Any questions about this app? Okay. So that's basically what I wanted to cover today. There are differences in the platform between other touch platforms, but I think there are some really great scenarios that you can take advantage of the features in Windows to solve the problems that you have. We talked a little bit about how writing touch applications is a little bit different than writing keyboard and mouse applications, but it's not really all that different. You can leverage a lot of the skills that you already have to build those apps, and if you work at it, you can get some really great user experiences on top of this. I think you can write anything you could write on another touch platform, you could write on a Windows device. It would just, you'd use a different API. But you can still get that very high level of polish on these devices. So that's all I had to cover. We've got a little bit of time left for questions if you guys want.
Yeah, we have 2 giveaways too. So if you step to the mic, the first 2 to the mic, we've got further questions. We've got a giveaway. So go ahead.
Because these are mobile devices, I was wondering what kind of data access methods you're using in these apps.
Okay, I don't know if the mic's picking that up, but the
Yeah.
question is, because these are mobile devices, what's the data access story? Is that
Yeah,
what you're asking?
how are you accessing the data on the back end, the corporate data, in other words?
Sure. So it's basically the same story that you have on laptops today. You've got the full complement of the features built into Windows. You can lock down your operating system. You can encrypt the drive. You can use things like WCF if you're using that now. You can use REST. On the
And find out. If it's an
in-
SQL database, are you creating ODBC connection? Or?
You can if you want to. In the Mercantile Exchange application that I demoed, they're actually deploying SQL Server Express to the tablet. That's the same story that they have for their laptop users today. They're using encryption and the features built into SQL Server to handle that. And then they are using SQL Server replication to keep that data in sync for their users.
Oh, yeah.
You could also expose a web service and have your client application talk directly to the web service in a secure manner. Anything that you're doing now on any remote network, or if you're using VPN and it works on Windows 7, it's going to work on Windows 7 on the tablet.
Preferred method because of the being a mobile device?
I don't know if there's a preferred method. It really depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But the things I would say is be careful, especially with consumer applications. I know this comes up on the phone. People are actually paying real money for that data transfer, so you want to keep that light and not chatty. Battery life is also a concern on mobile devices, so if it's expensive to fire up the 3G modem or to always search for a Wi-Fi connection, you may want to think about architecting your app in a way that it has a big cache of data it can use offline or that kind of thing.
Fortunately, most of the Microsoft technologies, they are designed for an offline scenario, so you can leverage that. But yeah, Ben brought up some really good points that these mobile devices, you do have to kind of think through what your requirements are.
Yeah,
make sure you pick something.
In the Tribune company application, their backend is in Azure. We're just making REST calls to an Azure service, and then I was doing the caching manually on Silverlight isolated storage. I was just writing the data that's important to keep, and then we were kind of smart about how often we check and that kind of thing, because we know that data on the back end is only replicated every X minute, or only updated every X minutes, so we don't need to check every 5 seconds for data and that kind of thing. Sure, thank you. You want to get?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Great question.
I actually have 2 questions.
We
First
only
of
have
all,
one giveaway, though.
all right, fine. First of all, I'm traditionally WinForms,
Okay.
so, and I have lots and lots of WinForms clients. But I'm starting to roll out some touch interfaces, and at this point, I'm really just bubbling through, letting the operating system pick it up as mouse events.
Sure.
How can I know in my code when I'm sitting in front of a touch screen versus a regular desktop?
On forms, I'm not sure.
Windows Forms, so you're trying to find out.
Because sometimes I want to do things a little bit differently.
Right. So you
Not when they actually touch the device. You want to know at startup time or
Probably during events, at the very
During
least.
events.
Because I'm going to need to, like I asked a question earlier about the interfaces that I'm looking at are, we're moving trucks around in a yard,
Yeah.
and it's all about truck numbers and truck weights. It's all numbers. So the keyboard layout is kind of cattywampus for me. I'm going to need to design my own keyboard. I was afraid that's what you were
Yeah,
going to say.
yeah.
But, so I need to do that. But I really don't want to do that over on the desktop.
yeah.
So it's, when I show the generated keyboard, the soft keyboard, I'm going to want to do that on the touch interface, but not over on my desktops. So, what's going to be the easiest way for me to monitor that?
Well, my answer would be you can actually, you know if somebody's actually touching it because that's a special event, right? So you could, and that's how native code does it. So when you do basically a set caret, how that's when you touch the device, it basically knows that it was a touch event that happened. So then it
So
puts
different
that on the-
events.
Yeah. So I would think that you'd want to only display that keyboard if you detect that it was a touch. But I'll let Ben.
This may be a non-technical solution, but you could just put a config. You could let your user choose. It's probably not as elegant as what you're looking for. I'm not aware of anything that you can query like an application startup that says, does this device support touch? or not?
There is native, which I guess you could get it through WPF. So there's an API that you can call that will tell you if you have a digitizer or not, and how many touch points you support. There is an API, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually using it, right? So it's going to detect it and say, yeah, you have a touch digitizer. It supports 2 touch points. So you could check that at application start, but that doesn't mean that they're not actually physically using a keyboard. They might have a laptop like that. So
Sure. Yeah.
so I think maybe you need to, I guess think through the scenario, and there could be a lot of different ways, either through a configuration.
And maybe the config it would be the best.
Probably they have the most control over that because they
Yeah.
won't.
That's probably automatable too, right? Like that call?
Yes.
You could do that from forms
Yes.
if you wanted to, through
Yeah, it's
common
just an
or operator.
API.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other question I would have is, what are my testing considerations as I'm exercising my unit testing, such and that? What do I need to be aware of?
So as far as unit testing goes, if you are using like a UI automator type framework or
Just the stuff built into 2010.
okay, I'm honestly not sure about those tools to tell you the truth. From kind of a human testing it, you're going to want, like I said, you're going to want to get the device in your hands as early as possible and test on that in as close to the real environment as you can. Other than that, you're really just testing user interaction through the UI. So you could simulate and automate those events if your tooling supports it, and then just make sure that your test scripts and your test scenarios include, physically hold a tablet device, and make sure you get left-handed and right-handed people, or have somebody test it from both. That can make a pretty big difference, especially if you're talking about navigation and putting things on one side or the other. It can be awkward to switch. If accessibility is a concern, there are some different accessibility concerns with touch, because if you're requiring someone to do this and they don't have all of their digits or something like that, that scenario might be applicable to you as well. But fundamentally, it's the same as other UI testing.
Thanks.
Sure.
That left versus right.
it'll get you.
Yeah.
And your designers will, I don't want to generalize, but your designers will probably be left-handed, your engineers will probably be right-handed, and one will work perfectly and the other won't work at all. So, yeah, it'll get you.
I had a question.
Yeah.
What's the, can I, like, with Microsoft Surface, does any of the stuff that you're talking about here apply to that too?
Yes and no. So I've done Surface development. It applies kind of both ways. So you can, Surface has a richer, has a different SDK. It's very, very similar, and a lot of the things that were in Surface 1 were kind of brought in the same manner into WPF 4. So things like manipulation events are there in Surface and in WPF. There are a lot more controls in Surface that are available kind of out of the box for you to use that support, a non-directional touch interface with lots of different people touching it. So they have like this control called scatter view, which lets you do the pictures scattered all over the display, which is a pretty common demo.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, a lot of the design considerations are going to be the same. You're going to want to test on an actual Surface unit if you can get your hands on one. Surface is a little different because unlike the tablet where you have kind of one, maybe two orientations, Surface is kind of orientationless, so you want to design your controls to not need to be pointed in one direction or another.
Yeah.
But I believe that I don't know if Surface 2 SDK is out yet or not, but
Not
I'm not
yet.
sure. I think it's either coming really soon or is already out.
Last time I saw it, they said it was coming out soon.
Yeah, that's a great. They have a really great emulator. Surface 2 the emulator is supposed to be not an emulator. It's just an app running that'll run on a touch device. So you can get your hands on one of these. You can write all the code on a laptop like this.
That's cool.
But even Surface 1, the emulator, as long as you have enough screen real estate that the native resolution of Surface 1 can fit on the touch device. I didn't want to drag that thing next to my desk and write applications on it, so I used one of those 3M devices Pat was talking about when I write Surface apps. That I put the emulator on that window and touch it. And you don't even need a touch device, actually. You can kind of fake it with a mouse on the emulator.
Yeah, it's only a single click.
Yeah.
Single touch.
Well, you can do this weird thing where you click with both buttons and it holds down one touch point, and then you can use your mouse for another one. Oh, and the other trick with Surface 2 is if you get two USB mice, you can do two different touch points.
That
So
rocks.
it's hard to do, but I mean you can hold down one and then with your dominant hand
Yeah.
do that gesture.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
sure, thank you. I think we're getting kicked out. Any other questions?
Thanks, everybody.
I'll be out in the hall if you get.